Hello, welcome back to the Matt Pfeiffer Experience. I am your host, Matthew Pfeiffer, and today we have a very special guest. We have Ashley Nicole Green. She's down here in Texas with me, and she is with the law office of A Green. And I am so excited to have this conversation with you. She has a wealth of knowledge and has a lot of diverse experience that I'm sure that you guys are going to be able to take a lot of information from. And without further ado, I'm going to kick it over to you, Ashley. If you could tell us a little bit about yourself and how did you get started?
Sure. So I am born and raised in the Houston, Texas area, specifically Pasadena, Texas, for those of you in the Houston area. I am one of five. So there's five of us, and I'm the oldest. And so I have the beauty of having to set the standard. I am been married to my husband almost 10 years. We have two small boys who are five now, 5 and 1. So I'm pretty busy in that regard. And then obviously I'm a family law attorney, day in, day out type of thing.
Yeah.
So I got started, to answer your question, in the practice of family law. I started out going to law school, didn't have an interest in it, but once I was in law school, I got an internship. I was able to come back home. I was in Topeka, Kansas, attending law school at that time.
Mhm.
And one of the professors said, you know what, I think you should go clerk for a family law judge, district judge. And I was just excited, honestly, to clerk for a judge. Didn't really know what I was getting into with family law. And so I came here, did a clerkship with Judge Millard out of the 310th. Actually enjoyed seeing what I saw. And so I ended up going for my next semester back in law school after the summer, focusing on some classes that had that family law aspect. And after that, I became the director of the Family Law Center at the law school and different things. And so I continued on that path, graduated, came back home, took the state bar, opened my own law firm. Um, and that part is a little interesting because I didn't have any intent on opening my own law firm. I really wanted to work for a firm. I wanted the big firm experience or mid-sized experience. I did have some offers when I came back. And my mentor at the time, as well as Judge Millard, was like, no, you're going to open your own firm and you're going to do this. And I was like, yeah, no, I have student loan debt. I have to pay my car note. I have stuff to do. But they pushed me and motivated me. And I opened my own firm in 2015. And it's been great since. So, yeah.
Well, great. That's an amazing story. What was it about family law that really attracted you to become a family law attorney and open up your own firm?
So, two things, and just to be real. So, when I was in law school, I worked for intern with the public defender's office there in Kansas, Topeka,
Hmm.
Kansas, and I was working on a murder case, and it freaked me out.
Hmm.
And just being real. And I realized this may not be the lifestyle that I want. This may not be the type of clientele that I want to engage in from day to
Hmm.
day. And so that was one factor. So once I figured that out, I said, okay, well, what am I going to do? So I thought about oil and gas for a little bit because obviously we're real big about oil and gas here in the
Yeah.
area. And then what really drew me to it was that I realized I wanted that personal experience of impacting individuals' lives. Oil
Hmm.
and gas was great because it was good money. And it really would challenge my brain, but I wouldn't have that real impact I felt like on individuals' lives. So that's really what drew me to being a family law attorney.
It's interesting. I completely relate to you when it comes to, that feeling of overwhelm when it comes to criminal law. When I was practicing therapy, I was recruited to be a forensic therapist, a forensic psychologist, and I couldn't do it. It's
Yeah.
very, people who are doing it, people who are in it. I give them all the credit in the world. The most that I can do, I actually have a second podcast where I talk about true crime and things like that. That's the
Hmm.
furthest that I can go because I
Yeah.
can pick and choose my stories. But no, I definitely can see where you're coming from. So with the clients that you work with in terms of family law, most of them, and you've said that you've worked with pretty much everyone at this point. You've been in this, for over 10 years at this point. Um, you work primarily with high net individuals. Are there things about high net worth individuals who that might be a little bit different from someone who may not be high net worth, who might be, just I don't want to say the average person, but average salary?
Yes, there are. And I am glad that you prefaced it with, I've worked with everyone. When I first started out, I was taking really anything that came in the door that could pay and that I felt that they had um, a case that I could relate to. Because I
Hmm.
don't take every case. I tell clients all the time, I am not the right attorney for everyone, and I am okay with that.
Yeah.
And I will help them try to find an attorney that may be fit for them. So, really, what pushed me into this direction was not because I wanted to make more money. That obviously comes with it. It was really that I started getting a lot of people reach out to say, hey, you've helped so and so, or hey, I seen you in court, or I had this referral from an attorney, or so forth. And it pushed my mindset to say, okay, maybe I need to make this shift
Yeah.
and start really immersing myself in there. And what I found when I did that was that these clients wanted the same thing that my clients wanted, that maybe were making minimum salaries, living possibly paycheck to paycheck,
Hmm.
because back in the day I was accepting payment plans, we were doing things of that sort, and so a lot of those clients were sometimes living paycheck to paycheck,
Hmm.
but they wanted the same thing. They wanted their children to be happy, they wanted to be in their children's lives. If it was a divorce, they wanted to really get peace and happiness and move on from the
Hmm.
toxicity. But what I found that was different was that my clients that do have that high network background is that they understood the importance of deadlines. They
Hmm.
understood the importance that I'm not their therapist, I am their attorney, and that it is much cheaper for them to go speak to a therapist than to
Yeah.
speak to me at an hourly rate. And they also understood the importance of organization. A
Hmm.
lot of my clients that I was assisting, and I still assist some, but that I was primarily assisting back then, we would have to really work through a lot of the emotional aspect of things. And it was
Hmm.
hard for me to get into the legal side, which was detrimental to our time and prepping for the case and being effective with our time, because I would have to kind of get through all those things and then get to the root of, okay, this is what this meeting's about. I need to
Yeah.
get your financial documents, or hey, we have this child custody evaluation that's going to start, the process. These are things I need you to have in place before they come. That part it required a big shift for me, because I realized, oh wait, like I don't have to do all that. I would get on a Zoom call or a meeting with the client at the office, and they would say, okay, what is it that I need to do? They have their pen, they have their paper, checklist. And
Yeah.
so I really encourage those who are watching this, that if you do feel like, you know what, I can't relate to a high network person, you want the same thing that they want, and you can achieve that. You just have to change your mindset and your framework on how you approach your case.
So essentially, being more organized, proactive is the word that really comes to mind. And it sounds like having more like reasonable expectation of what the case is going to look like when it comes to the outcome.
Yeah, and I think another thing is having a support system. That is something we really, really push in my office between myself and my other staff members. Is
Hmm.
that we're a part of your support system. We
Yeah.
are not your entire support system.
Right.
And I tell them this all the time. I need you to get a therapist. I need you to get
Yeah.
into a support group. If you're
Hmm.
struggling with a divorce or your child custody, get into a support group. I need you to get family and friends to help out, because there may be times where we're in court till 5 o'clock, and you can't
Yeah.
go get the kids,
Yeah.
and you need to figure that out. So having that support group to say, look, I'm going through this challenging time and I'm going to need to lean on you guys, or
Yeah.
having a time, I have a kind of a rule in the office, as I tell some of my clients, I say, before you contact me, I want you to run this concern that you have or these feelings you're having by a really good friend that is rational,
Yeah.
right? So if you're upset, like, oh, my spouse did this, or oh, the other party did this, run that by them. And if
Hmm.
they're your true friend, they'll say, oh, yeah, I don't think that was a really good idea that he did
Yeah.
that or that she did that. But I don't think that's something you need to go run to your attorney about. Let's see if we can work through this, because it actually saves them money and time.
Yeah.
So having that support system is very important.
And I mean, you hit the nail on the head. Keyword rational. And I always tell people to make sure you talk to like a variety of people who know your soon to be ex. Maybe they don't know
Hmm.
him, and you just explain the story. I tell people to talk to three people if you can. But a lot of people, you're right. They may have been married for so long and got so entwined into that marriage for both good or negative reasons, because maybe the relationship was, decided to go sideways, or there was abuse or isolation there, and they don't have anyone that they can run to. But it's not. I always tell people it's not. We can understand where you're coming from, but it's very important to have a community, that you can bounce off of, that you can bounce ideas off of, that could be a sounding board, whether that be a church community. Even if you're not involved in church, might be time to consider it, at least during the points that you're going through divorce, just to have the sounding board.
Yes, absolutely. I'm obviously and I post this on my social media. I'm a firm believer in God. I tell clients all the time, um, I am a vessel that He uses.
Yeah.
A lot of clients that I have say, I wouldn't have gotten through this without you, or, you're exactly what I needed. And I tell them, no, I am a vessel that He uses, and I'm giving you what He needs for you to have in this next journey. And those clients, that maybe come in, they don't have that connection.
Yeah.
I do encourage them to seek out whatever religion that they feel comfortable with. I
Yeah.
don't push, my particular religion on them, but I never shy away from the fact that I'm a believer. I can't tell you how many times I've prayed with clients in the hallway before court. I prayed with them over the phone. I've gotten up before court, 5 o'clock in the morning, praying, reading scripture, getting my mind right, asking the Holy Spirit to meet me in the courtroom, because I believe that I'm a better attorney whenever I put Him in the midst of it.
Yeah, absolutely. When it and Also, when it comes to that, what are some misconceptions that people might have when it comes to high net worth divorces? Do you I think there's this perception that if someone is going through a high net worth divorce, that there's no abuse involved, or that those type of relationships can't be abusive, or it's just a simple cakewalk. But from the cases I've worked with, that was not the case whatsoever.
Yeah, you're exactly right. One of the things that comes to mind is that abuse isn't what we always think it is. The black eye, the bruised arm. There's also a big part in those type of cases of financial abuse, is what I see. Hiding assets, verbal abuse. A lot of my clients get to a point where they really lose their voice.
Mm.
They're kind of walking on eggshells. The
Yeah.
people that are in this type of tax bracket, they're not stupid. They're not going
Right.
to lose their job. They're not going to lose, the things that they worked hard for. So they're not going to result most of the time. Now, it's not always, but
Yeah.
most of the time, they're not going to result to physical violence.
Hmm.
They're going to do everything to shy away from that and start controlling you through words, through their actions.
And I
And so
noticed
I
that
see that.
people I've worked with, there was a lot more abuse by proxy. So it may not be
Mhm.
directly that individual, but because an individual had assets and had employees, or if they ran a police department, or if they, were, some sort of city official, they had access to people to be able to spy on you, drive past your house, stalk you in ways that the average person may not be able to do. Turn off utilities, or
Mhm.
just having access and to be able to control you in ways where they don't have to physically touch you or cause harm, but they can cause and create a lot of different type of damage, just by the fact that they have so much power and they have so much control. Is that something that you've seen as well?
Absolutely. And the clients start going through like a traumatic experience throughout
Hmm.
their divorce. And so we definitely see, putting devices on people's vehicles, which obviously now with updated legislation, it's always been you can't do that, but it's some added language in there now with that. I've seen exactly like you said, having someone that's not exactly them, but a family member or coworker, someone that's following them or watching them. I've definitely seen those things, and eventually at some point the clients start realizing that those aren't normal, because one thing I think is a big misconception is they will start making this narrative where you
Hmm.
start believing it. Oh, I'm just having so and so drive by to make sure you don't need anything. Or,
Yeah.
oh, we had a break in the neighborhood, so they're just driving by. Or, oh, I put that on your car so that if you're stuck on the side of the road and you don't know where you're at, I can be able to track you and have
Hmm.
someone, they start putting these narratives together, and you start second guessing, like, well, maybe. maybe I'm overthinking this. Like
It's a
maybe they
form of
really do
gaslighting.
care.
Yeah. It's
Yeah,
crazy
like
making. It's a form of gaslighting. So you're literally start questioning your own reality. The person who is abusive is actually the person who's actually there to
yeah,
protect you when it's just not the case whatsoever. And
yeah.
they come up with all these different excuses. And sometimes they might even believe it themselves, but it's still not, that still doesn't
Hmm.
make it right. And it's really just them realizing that they're losing their control over you, over the kids, over the scenario. And I'm assuming that a lot of the people that you work with are a lot of times worried about the perception of how a divorce will impact them, in the public eye.
Yeah, definitely. 100% agree.
Yeah. When it comes to that, also when it comes to that perception and people wanting to have power and control, what have you seen when it comes to prenups? Do you see that people are more proactive with prenups? Do you feel like that people should be, or they are just still kind of willy nilly about them? And where do you stand, and what do you usually advise to your clients in terms of prenups?
So to answer your first question, I think we're having a shift where more people are willing to have that conversation with their spouse
Right.
or their fiance before they get married. That hey, we're just trying to make this easier, figure it out. Like this is what's going to be yours, what's going to be mine. And so I do think we're having a shift towards it's not just Hollywood people that get to have prenups, but everyday people could have prenups, and
Yeah.
it's actually going to save them now in terms of the things that I have advised clients of, as I always one tell them, you have to figure out what you want to protect because if you quite frankly don't have any assets, it may not make sense to get a prenup.
Hmm.
And if you don't have the intent to, right? Because sometimes you come in and you don't have anything, but you're going to work towards it. You're building your life and you're going to want to have things. And so you may need them. So I always tell them to evaluate what are their long-term goals. Second, have the conversation with their spouse to see what it is that their spouses would want versus what they would want. Usually, a big red flag, as I tell people, if someone is like super against a prenup, um, I'm not a marriage counselor, I'm not any counselor, but if they're not really wanting to make it where if you go through a divorce, it's going to keep both of y'all like in a good place and not have all this, anxiety and frustration and money spent, then they may not be the person for you.
Yeah.
They may not be, your equal oak, and you may need to go find that person. So that's the first thing. The second thing is I tell them realistically, what is it that you want at the end of this? Is it
Right.
you want to make sure you're protecting your retirement? Is it you want to make sure you're protecting assets related to real property like your homes or vacation homes? And after you're able to kind of put all that together, make sure the third thing you do is that you're approaching them with an open mind of fairness.
Yeah.
Because coming in and thinking you're going to have a prenup where you keep everything, your spouse gets nothing, that's not likely going to be real realistic. And it may be subject to attack if there is a divorce filed.
Yeah.
So those are the things I tell them to think about.
One of the things I've learned through this process and through interviewing a lot of attorneys is that really, even if you don't have a prenup, everyone really actually has a prenup, and that prenup is whatever state legislation or whatever state law you have. And so, really, it's in your best interest if you, because every single marriage is going to end at some point, either in death or divorce, one way or the other. And I always tell people it's better to have your assets in order, no matter which direction that you go. It gives everyone a peace of mind. And I know the pushback that I get is very similar to what you just explained, and oftentimes it comes from the person who is the lower net individual in the relationship, who's afraid that they're going to end up on the streets, end up with nothing. But in reality, a well done prenup doesn't necessarily have to mean that the one person walks away with everything and then the other person walks away with nothing. It can be tiered. If you're together for, 1 year, you get x amount of money. If you were together for 5 years, you get a different amount. I know Michael Jordan has his set up that way, that after x amount of years, she, his new wife is, able to walk away with, a larger sum than what she would in year one. So it doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to come away with nothing, and it also doesn't necessarily mean that the other person isn't going to have to pay out or isn't going to have to pay alimony or any of those things. But from what I understand, it's just that you have an agreement of what it's going to look like if you decide to part ways.
Absolutely. And I think you really worded it in a way that hopefully conceptualizes with people in their mind is that if you don't have a prenup, then you're just going to go based off what the Texas family law code
Yeah.
says if you're here in Texas. And the language is a just and fair and equitable division. Now that's subject to the court's discretion. So you're literally putting all of your hard earned time and assets and your future into the hands of someone else to decide. You do have some control by going through a mediation process and things like that to try to get that control back if you don't have a prenup. But if you don't reach an agreement, then you're letting the court decide what that division looks like.
Are there Are there things that can't go into a prenup? Is it really just about how the assets are going to be divided, or are there other things that people should consider put into a prenup, and then other things that the courts just absolutely will not allow?
So one of the things is obviously child custody, things of that sort. A lot of times I get a lot of calls about that, and the court has to weigh best interest, right?
Yeah.
So those are things we can't put in there. We don't know what the future may hold. I think to take it in the opposite direction of your question is a lot of times people think that they can have a prenup and have it drawn up,
Hmm.
and whatever's in there is in there. But what I like to remind people is that you have to do a disclosure, and that disclosure has to be attached to it or at least has to be exchanged with the other party.
Yeah.
And that's something that I have found that people aren't privy to. They don't realize that. Like you have to disclose every single asset that you currently have. So the other party understands what it is that they would be leaving on the table or walking away from. Otherwise, they wouldn't be privy to that.
Yeah.
And so not so much of what you can't include in that regard to that question, but more so what you need to realize what you're going to have to include to make sure that your prenup is valid.
One of the things that has come up with high net worth divorces that I really haven't seen as much with other with the average salaried divorces is the fear that the person's going to take off with the children, especially
Mhm.
if they have like homes in like another country, another state. And sometimes that's a real actual threat, especially if one of the individuals isn't necessarily from the states. How is something like and they have the assets to be able to pull it off where it's their week and they have custody and they can fly them wherever they want. They can, go back home to wherever it is that they're from and just not bring the kids back. And I know that's a real fear for people. Is there things that you put limits that you put to make sure things like that don't happen, or what happens in situations like that?
So, in situations like that, the first thing is you need to obviously file. You might need to do what's called an emergency TRO, temporary restraining order, with extraordinary relief, where you're asking for the court to take some action ex parte without the other party having opportunity to present evidence, and have the children return back to this state,
Hmm.
or this country if they left the country. The other thing is that you do want to act fast, especially if they're in a country that's not part of the Hague Convention. That can be very scary because if they're not part of our Hague Treaty, that country is not going to necessarily help in getting the child back. But those who are part of that treaty with us will assist. But these are things that I'm glad you asked, that people really I don't want to say they don't care about them, but they let too
Yeah.
much time pass.
Hmm.
Somebody will call me and say, "Hey Ash, I'm doing this consultation and my spouse left a month ago." I'm like, "A month ago? Like
Yeah.
you should have been calling me like week one, day
Yeah.
one.
Hmm.
Not to say that you don't have the option to still bring some request or relief to the court, but you kind of acquiesce for that whole month in some
Yeah.
regard, right? Because you
Hmm.
didn't take action.
Right.
So those are the things I would definitely tell people is that when it happens, immediately reach out and get counsel or start filing something with the court so the court
Yeah.
can start being aware of that.
I remember there was a gentleman who I was working with several years ago that was in a situation like that where the mother basically dropped off. They had 50-50, but the mother dropped off the daughter and left and was gone for several years, and he did
Mhm.
nothing about it. Well, the mother ended up coming back, and she struggled with addiction and a
Mhm.
lot of other mental health issues. And but because he didn't do anything, it was like they really kind of had to pick up back where they left off. I mean, the courts did put some parameters, but essentially they were working back towards 50-50, despite his grievance to it, because like you said, he didn't do anything about it. And so I think that, yeah, I think that you hit the nail on the head about being proactive, and going to court immediately and saying something.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. What about in terms of high net, in terms of custody issues and those sorts of things, and like when someone is using like child support or alimony as like a way to like gain leverage over someone, like threatening not to pay, or just flat out not paying if you're dating someone, or what do you advise that people do in situations like that?
So I say the phrase weaponizing the children against the other
Yep.
parent. I really, really dislike that. Um, I represent surprisingly a lot of male clients.
Hmm.
Represent a handful still of women, but I would say it's like little, just a tad bit more of male clients. And one of the things that I've noticed with my male clients is that they'll come in and be like, "Man, I ain't trying to pay that much money on child support, Ash," and I'm like, "Look." And I'll run it down for them, and I'll be like, I pay this amount in, daycare, or this amount in babysitters, and this is how much food is. And I think whenever you have an attorney that is truly there for the best interest of your children and you, because I always tell people I can't adequately represent you if I'm fighting against what's in the best interest of your children when it relates to
Hmm.
child custody cases.
Right.
The slogan in our office is that children are at the center of every decision, and I take that very serious, whether I'm representing a mom or a dad, right?
Right.
And so I think when you have an advocate and a team that says, "Hey, this really isn't about the money. This isn't really about how much you're spending out. It's about the quality of life that your child will have." And if you're in a
Yeah.
situation, because I know there's going to be some that say, "Well, all they doing is spending the money on X, Y, and Z," not related to the child. Well, then that may be a situation where you need to file for modification and ask for
Yeah.
the right to determine the residence, right?
Hmm.
And meet those Holly factors that the court looks at to say you can provide a better lifestyle for the child than the current parent is, that is in line with the best interest of the child. But to just
Yeah.
say, "Well, I don't want to pay it because this is what the money is used for and I don't agree with it," but you're not willing to shift that burden and say, "Well, I'm going to ask for primary," right?
Right.
I always I tell them, don't come in my office saying that, because you're going to end up making me mad.
Yeah.
And so let's just approach this like, do you want to go for primary? Okay, you don't. Okay, so then let's talk about what child support looks like. Not
Right.
to say that you have to go in and pay the amount that's guidelines. There's things you can work out. I've worked out with clients that they pay slightly less, but they're contributing to extracurricular, and maybe extracurricular isn't over the course of every month of the year. Maybe it's fall, maybe they do football, baseball. And so it's still contributing so that the other parent has the ability to keep the child in those things, but it spreads out you having to, pay the max guideline child support. Most of my clients, I will say, especially with me working with those who are, C-suites, executives, they're just like, "Look, I'm gonna pay what I gotta pay and move on." And some of
Yeah.
them even pay more. Like they'll say,
Hmm.
"I'm going to pay guidelines and also contribute to private school tuition or extracurricular." So, um, people that do that, I think that their goal is not truly the best interest of their children,
Hmm.
and I think that they truly lose sight of the lifestyle that they want for their
Yeah.
children, and it's more so focused on what makes the parents or the parents' lifestyle happy or unhappy, and I don't think that's a good approach.
Yeah. One of the things, we see this all over social media and people talk about it all the time. But high net worth individuals are kind of the cream of the crop when it comes to the dating scene. One of the things I love talking to attorneys about is because attorneys give great relationship advice, great dating advice, because you guys see it at the end so often. What's the best way for people who are saying, I really want to date someone who makes X amount of money, or I'm someone who makes X amount of money, and I'm worried about someone either taking my money, or I'm worried about someone taking advantage of me or whatever. What would you say, like on the dating scene, that they should look out for, that might be some red flags or deal breakers? I mean, we saw this whole Risa Tisa thing. That's been, someone who could be lying about their assets where they're a complete fraud, or someone who may be lying about where their assets are, who might be kind of downplaying some things and being very manipulative, being very vindictive. What are some things that people should look out for on the dating scene that they may be aware of? Because what we've seen is that just because they're high net worth doesn't mean that they're a good character person, doesn't mean they're a good person at all, doesn't mean they're not abusive. Um, it just in some situations, it just looks very different.
Yeah. So the biggest thing is, I tell people is that you should definitely do a credit check.
Hmm.
It was so funny when my husband and I we started dating right before I graduated law school, and that was something that like in my family, like my grandma, my grandparents, were like, you got to know who you walking into, and
Yep.
so that was something that we did, and I mean we
Yep.
were just like in our early 20s trying to get our lives together, but he needed to know how much debt I had as far as student loan. I needed to know how much debt he had, um, to figure out like how are we going to approach this? Because if we're
Yep.
not going to approach this on the same, mindset, then this may not work out. Because
Right.
finances is a big reason why divorces and relationship ends. Is because there's a
Absolutely.
difference in how management of finances happens. So that's my first thing. Do a credit report, right? It's
Hmm.
going to be able to tell you if they're living off of credit cards or if they truly got some money, and that
Yep.
they're able to manage it. The other
Yep.
thing um, is really have the time to get to know them in a setting that has a neutral third party, whether that's a counselor, marriage counselor, therapist, someone. Whenever you have this feeling of like something's not making sense, right? Something's not adding up, and I think with Ressa Tessa, she had the red flags, and she had other parties, third parties, kind of look in and give her the question. She talked about the realtor, who kind of gave her
Yeah.
that one line where she was like, you know what, something ain't right. But whenever you do hear that from them, really take the time to not look over that. Or like you talked about earlier, allowing for the other party to gaslight you in that situation and to draw you away from that person. Because
Yeah.
whenever you're in a situation where they don't have, if they're truly not fit for you and they don't have control anymore because of that third party, they're going to pull you away from that person.
Hmm.
And they're not going to
Yeah.
want to be around that person because that person is going to start, bringing insight into some of the things they're not seeing. And
Yeah.
so that's the second thing, is to get in front of a third party that is a neutral. Because I thought it was so interesting that her family members at the beginning were like, they loved him, he was great, he would come over and converse, but it wasn't until the end when they were like, well, I didn't really think, I think her uncle was like, I didn't think he really was a football player. Well,
Yeah.
why you ain't say that? Like,
Yeah.
why you didn't say things like that? So
Yeah.
getting in front of someone that is going to be truthful with you, I think is important. And then the third thing I think is not forcing a relationship when it just isn't
Yeah.
working. I think that's the biggest thing. I think even in marriages, some of my clients stay in it longer than they should, and it impacts either them financially, it dramatically impacts their children
Yeah.
in a negative way. I'm a strong believer that children will thrive better in a household that is two separate households than a household that is full of toxicity every day.
Hmm. Yeah.
Not that I'm an advocate of divorce, but I am an advocate of having a better look on life that doesn't have
Yeah.
those things. So
That's.
those are the three things I would definitely say: is get out of it sooner than you probably want to,
Hmm.
is the third thing. So
Yeah. Something I tell people all the time: if things don't add up, then it's time to subtract yourself.
yeah, that's a good
Yeah.
one. I like that. I'm gonna have to use that.
Yep. Well, Ashley, thank you so much for your time. It has been amazing. You dropped a lot of gems today. Can you tell the audience where they can find you at, if they want to connect with you, if they want to refer you to a friend or family member?
Sure. So we are here in Houston, Texas. You can find me on social media at Law Office of A Green on Instagram and Facebook, and also on TikTok. I also have a podcast, the Lingo Mumbo Jumbo podcast, where this season we're actually bringing on past clients. So if you want to hear from my clients about how their experience has been with the office and get a sense if you'll be a good fit, definitely reach out. You can contact our office on the web at www.lawofficeofagreen.com, and I'd love to connect with you.
And if you're watching this on YouTube, make sure you go down to the comment section, and you can also go down into the description box and you'll see all of her information there. If you're listening to this on Spotify or Apple, you can go down into the show notes. All of her information will be there as well. Leave a comment into the comment section, a takeaway, something that maybe you didn't know until today's episode, something that you learned from Ashley today or you learned from today's episode. Also, make sure you go over to her social media, show her some love, give her some support, likes, comments, any form of engagement that you can. And also make sure you connect with her if you're in the Houston or if you're in the Texas area and you are looking for an attorney. So with all that being said, thank you very much. This is the Matt Pfeiffer Experience. I'm your host, Matthew Pfeiffer. With all that being said, I'll see you in the next episode. You guys have a good one.